Welcome to the fourth of our political candidate forums in advance of the November 8th general election. This forum, a cooperative production of the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee, the Tallahassee Democrat, and WFSU Public Media. Our candidates today are running for the Florida State Representative District 8. I'm Tom Flanagan from WFSU Public Media. I'm joined by James Call from the Tallahassee Democrat and Trish Neely from the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee. We're going to be questioning the candidates on various topics, so let's take a look at the ground rules and then we are going to meet those candidates.
The candidates for state representative, left to right, are Kurt Bender and Gallup P. Franklin. Reminder for those who are watching on social media, please hit the share button and help all your friends join the discussion too. Here's how the forum will work. We'll rotate which candidate gets to answer first. We have a lot of questions, so we're going to ask the candidates to keep your answers brief. We'll keep time, which we will ding when your time is up, and that will sound like this. You don't have to come to a dead stop right then, but finish your sentence and we'll move on. In the middle of the forum, we also have a lightning round when we ask you to keep your answers to just one sentence. At the end of the forum, we'll give you 60 seconds to make the case directly to voters and share your website or any other information.
If you are watching on Facebook and you have a question for our candidates, go ahead and type them into the comments section and we'll get to as many of them as we can. Time is very limited, so you can improve your chances of your question being asked if you keep it brief and polite and make it a question that is applicable to both of our candidates. So, candidates, do you have any questions for us?
Not at the moment, no. Thanks.
I do. Is there a timer somewhere that we can see how long we're going on the responses, or do we just guess or wait for the bell?
Actually, we do not have a timer. I know there's some places that have like a big digital clock or something, but you have to kind of feel it. All right. It helps to keep the answers succinct because then you'll have more opportunity to answer additional questions. Because we can vary things around. If we come towards the end of the forum and we have additional time, we can lengthen the amount of time you have for some of your responses. So we'll try to be as flexible as possible. But again, shorter is better in this regard.
Fair enough.
Okay. Any other questions? Okay. Well, then let's jump in with the first question. And Tom, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, and I will kick it back here to James because Tallahassee Democrat gets the opening salvo in the questioning.
Okay, thank you all. Democrats have tried to frame this as one of the most important elections of our lifetime. If you agree, why is this election so important? And 45 seconds, there will be follow-up. Mr. Bender, you go first.
Every election is the most important election of our lifetime, just like every day is the most important day of my life. I think that every time that you have an opportunity to contribute to society, to vote, to participate in politics, when I make my decisions, I like to think that every single decision or every single shot I make is a game-winning shot. And I approach that mentality in everything that I do. I invest maximum effort into every single thing I do. So I think every vote is the most important vote. And we know from Stacey Abrams' recent lawsuit that one person being denied the right to cast a vote made the election at issue result in a tie. So every single vote is the deciding factor. Every single election is a critical election.
Mr. Franklin.
I would agree with Mr. Bender. Every election is very important, but this election is important for unique reasons. We have the right to vote on this ballot. So for example, as we know currently, there have been strides to try to limit and create obstacles to certain communities not being able to cast a ballot to vote. We also have on this ballot in November focusing on supporting teachers, ensuring that they have a teaching environment that they can feel safe in and not feel like their jobs go on the line every single time they have a conversation with the child. Thank you for that question.
Okay, so the follow-up questions, 30 seconds each. We'll start with you, Mr. Franklin. Do you believe changes are needed in Florida law to improve voter access to the ballot?
Absolutely. We need to continue to expand access to the ballot. Abraham Lincoln said it the best. Our government should be of the people, by the people, and for the people. But to do that, we have to ensure that everyone has access to the political process. And so creating barriers to voting is very difficult and not good for our democracy. So expanding access, ensuring we have more polling locations, ensuring that people can vote early for a longer period of times. I'll even imagine, why do we have to register to vote? If you're a United States citizen with a social security card.
Mr. Bender, are changes needed in Florida law to improve voter access to the ballot? 30 seconds.
I think we're good and we're heading in a good direction. For example, in 2021 is when we implemented the voter ID law, and a big criticism of that law was that there's a substantial group of folks that cannot afford an ID. So in 2022, we implemented the voter ID initiative, to where if you can't afford a voter ID, you go to the DMV with your free voter registration card and say, I demand a voter ID. I'm experiencing financial hardship. So, and then they have to give you one, and they can't even ask you what your financial hardship is. So I think that, we have to identify the issues. We can't paint it with a broad.
Okay, Mr. Bender, let's stay with you for the next follow-up. Do you have faith in Governor Ron DeSantis' administration and Secretary of State Cord Byrd will conduct a fair, impartial election and vote count? 30 seconds.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, I do have confidence in the governor as well as Secretary of State to have a fair vote count here in Florida. You can even see what he's done recently. He's expanded access to voting down in Southwest Florida where Hurricane Ian struck. So it shows he does have a level of commitment to democracy. I just think we need to expand that beyond what he's done in the legislature to decrease access, such as implementing ID laws and those kind of things.
And here's the final follow-up on this topic. Mr. Franklin, what purpose should government serve?
Government should serve a purpose to focus on safety, public health. Also, we have to do correct markets when they kind of go out of whack. So, for example, right now we're having a challenge with inflation. And so I believe, just like even though the Federal Reserve is not directly connected to government, but we have to make sure we put in measures to try to slow down that inflation, such as you know, right now, prices at the gas pump are lower because we've waived taxes. As you know, we're waiving taxes on baby products, diapers, children's clothes. So those kind of.
Mr. Bender, same question. What purpose do you think government should serve?
Government, the sole purpose of government, I was a state employee at Department of Business Professional Regulation, and our goal is to assist with the health, welfare, and safety of our citizens. And the purpose of government is to leverage their economies of scale to make a broader impact. So things that the individual can't affect, I think each of us have an individual responsibility, but collectively as the government, there's economies of scale that we could tackle broader issues that an individual by themselves may not be able to.
All right, folks, before we get into our next question here, just a little housekeeping reminder here. If you hear the bell sound while you're talking, finish your sentence. You don't have to cut it off right there. So
Okay.
that makes it a little less abrupt when we do that. Into the economy we go, gentlemen, and let's talk about the economics specifically of House District 8. The poverty level, as you know, nearly double the state average. The median income, about a third less than the state average. So how do you propose to change those numbers? For a 45-second response, let's first go to you, Mr. Franklin.
We have to invest in infrastructure, ensuring that we have the infrastructure that can handle small businesses growing, as well as bringing larger companies here. In addition, that we have to invest in education. As you know, companies decide on where they go based on the talent pipeline, and not just K through 12, but also trade schools and skills, where people know if they come to Tallahassee, not only will they have the infrastructure necessary to support their manufacturing or their business, but also the talent pipeline to service their business and clients.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bender, sir.
I think we need new type of leadership in District 8. For 30 years, we'd had the same type of leadership, which led us to be the poorest zip code in the entire state. So I think that needs to change. Particularly, I would focus on hardening our renewable energy infrastructure. And I have examples of schools like Lake Sumter and Orlando where they have a utility training program, and the folks are getting snapped up at $65,000 jobs. I think we can do this. In fact, the reason I ran is because I was trying to push renewable energy initiatives, and it took too long for people to call me back. So I said, if I was a candidate, maybe I can drive these forward sooner. So I think a very particular thing that we can do is have the trade schools, which I've had conversations with. The programs are already out there. We just have to implement them. And then I think that'll be a great way to strengthen economic development.
All right, gentlemen, a few follow-ups here, starting with you, Mr. Bender, 30 seconds for response. With inflation continuing to hit Floridians' pockets and wallets, what would you do to support consumers going forward?
I think that inflation is something that we have to have a sober expectation of what we can accomplish as a state representative. And inflation is something that must be tackled with economies of scale of the federal government, particularly where the pain is more acute here in Florida, where folks come down, spend their money, and then they leave. I think that something we should do is encourage folks to come here and live here so the money continues to circulate. I think that, for example, there's a lot of large companies that are coming to Florida because of the favorable tax policies, and we could encourage that and continue to move that forward and charge it for it.
All right, thank you. Mr. Franklin, same question.
Great question. To address inflation, right now we have looked at taxes here in Florida. So we have to look at how do we address taxes for consumers like we've done at the gas pump and the grocery store for children and babies types of products. So that's very important in reference to addressing inflation. Also focusing on diversifying the economy. And the reason why that's important is because we can diversify the economy and not just be hinged on tourism, then obviously the flow of money continues to increase. Also, because Florida is a great place.
Okay, one quick follow-up, if I may, please. And this really focuses specifically on our locale, the Panhandle delegation and lawmakers from rural areas in general, with 33 counties of the 67 we have in Florida being designated by the state as rural in nature. Those folks vastly outnumbered by delegations from Central and South Florida, as you're aware. So what skills do you have to enable you to compete for state money, to improve infrastructure and boost economic development in this area? Mr. Franklin, you first.
I plan on partnering with Republicans that also represent rural areas. As you know, normally Democrats represent the more higher populated cities, and Republicans tend to represent rural areas. And so I think having that relationship, because we have commonalities in the challenges that we're facing. And so working together with all of those rural area representatives to ensure that we can focus on access to healthcare, economic development, investing in education. And I believe that's how we'll approach assuring that District 8 can receive the funding necessary to move forward.
Okay, same question, Mr.
Can
Bender.
you repeat that question, please?
Sure thing. You have folks, particularly in areas like District 8 and other rural areas of Florida, their legislative delegations kind of outgunned in terms of numerical superiority by folks in Central and South Florida. So what kind of skill set can you bring to the table to make sure that places like District 8 don't get left behind when there are budgetary considerations and other things swirling about the legislature?
I think it's having a conversation with your constituents, particularly in District 8. We know that in 2022, the Florida legislature passed a law, the nuisance law, to assist the ag community so that when they operate their equipment, they don't get noise complaints that get them in trouble. So there's different ways to support the industry. I think that's something we'll do if we touch on economic development, is leverage the opportunity zone funding that we can have to improve and harden infrastructure.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Neely, your turn.
Okay, our youth is our future, so let's move into the education segment. And Mr. Bender, I'm going to start with you. What do you think about the governor's direction for public education in the state of Florida? 45 seconds, please.
Well, I'll talk about what was reported in the Tallahassee Democrat today, where the support our school programs, $200 million was allocated to schools as an incentive. I know in 2021, the legislature, what Governor DeSantis said, if you can read, you can learn. And we know that there's a measure of students at like 5th grade, depending on how they do, depending on how many beds to build in the prison. Now, every student that's struggling in K through 12 education, up to a certain grade level, they get a free book every single month. And I think it's significant to say it's a hardcover book as opposed to a softcover. I think 2021 was a great year for education, and 2022 as well.
Okay, Mr. Franklin, same question. What do you think about the governor's direction for public education?
There's some good things he's done, but also some challenging things he's done to negatively impact education. I'll start with the good things, just to be polite. He has invested in, as you know, starting salaries now for teachers have increased under the governor. I applaud him for helping to lead the charge in that. Obviously, like Mr. Bender said, he's making good investments within the school system. Where he's actually, I believe, making some mistakes is trying to control what teachers teach in their classroom. Even though I do believe parents should have a right to their child's education, just like my mom. My mom decided to homeschool me because she felt that was in my best interest. But she didn't go into the classroom and try to mandate essentially what conversations could be had. And so there hasn't been enough support for teachers, and people wonder why we have a shortage, why people are walking away.
Thank you. I'm going to stay with you, Mr. Franklin, for a follow-up. Parents of gay and trans students tell reporters the Parental Rights in Education Act has had a chilling effect in public schools, leading to books being banned and curriculum censored. Do you think the so-called Don't Say Gay bill needs to be repealed? 30 seconds, please.
Yes, I would vote to repeal the Don't Say Gay bill. I know quite a few teachers, and every teacher I know is in it for the right reasons, which is to ensure that each student be the best version of themselves. And so teachers are oftentimes the first place a child can come and have a conversation about a challenge they might be having. Yes, I don't encourage teachers maybe putting their own personal views into a child, but being there to have the conversation, help direct them to child psychologists, and school counselors to make sure professionals can help guide the child in a great way, I think is positive.
Thank you. Mr. Bender, same question. Do you think the so-called Don't Say Gay bill needs to be repealed?
I think the parental rights bill absolutely should not be repealed because it did some very good things. It did a lot more good than I think the media and other folks portray. For example, one of the problems with education is that there's not a holistic approach and support from parents. The new bill mandates that school districts, they must come up with a plan and they must publish a policy on how to get parents involved in the students' homeworks. For example, prior to this bill, if a teacher suspected a child being subject to abuse by another state employee, they didn't have to report it. Now they do. I think there's a lot of good.
Okay. And I want to stay with you for another follow-up. How would you address the teacher shortage in Florida's public schools?
I think we're already addressing it. For example, in 2022, we passed the Homestead Act that increased homestead protection for teachers from $50,000 to $75,000 for the tax exemption. And I think that we have to focus on not just particularly the teachers. We increase salary, but how can we support the teachers even beginning at home? As I said, 2021 and 2022 was a great year for education, as well as, like I just mentioned today, there's $200 million going out to schools if you maintain an A rating or you increase. So I think it's a holistic approach that we need to continue to approach.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Franklin, how would you address the teacher shortage in Florida's public schools?
We should consider renewing the expired teaching certificates. When you come in those first 2 years, you have a temporary teaching certificate. So looking at renewing those expired ones so that those temporary teachers temporarily can continue to teach for another 2 or 3 years. Look at additional, like expanding that tax exemption. Looking at how can we provide maybe home ownership loans at a better interest rate, kind of subsidized by the state government, that can really help teachers, even though the salaries still aren't in the place with inflation where they need to be, at least they know there's some type of support they can have in doing so.
Okay, thank you both.
All right, folks, we're off into the arena of crime and law enforcement. And flipping over to you, Mr. Bender, to start here in a 30-second response, please. How do you propose that the state deals with what appears to be an epidemic of gun violence?
I think that the solving the epidemic of gun violence is the things that Dr. Franklin and I are doing in our daily lives. I have a mentee that's facing some serious charges, and he zoomed in for our last debate last night. I know that he works with the distinguished young men. I think is an approach, but I think what we need to do is shift who we say are the victims and show that the youth, not saying other folks aren't victim, but help them identify with it at home, that the victims are their mothers, their sisters, the other folks that they leave behind when they commit crime that hits at home.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Franklin, your thoughts?
We have to support youth support organizations. I'm a co-founder of one as well, and it's so important that the youth are in programs where they're able to be professionally developed and also set on a great path. Oftentimes, if you leave school and you're not a part of an after-school program or a youth support program or athletic program, then you have all this free time in your hand. And the Bible talks about it. You know, if you have a lot of free time, idle mind clearly is the place for the devil's hands. And so youth support programs are important. Also, technology on firearms. You know, we talk about how do we control and ensure that firearms are being used appropriately, but if we make sure there's some type of biometrics that exist that prevent people from being able to steal guns and then also use them.
Thank you, sir. We'll stick with you for a follow-up here, 30 seconds again. Do you support a so-called constitutional carry or open carry bill to allow people to display and carry guns in public openly?
No, I don't support constitutional carry to openly carry guns. I do think people should have to go through a process like we have a concealed permit license, ensure that we have different psychological tests and background checks that make sure that the person carrying a gun are good people. I think good people should have guns in their hands. That's a fact. My challenge is ensuring that we don't have guns in the hands of bad folks. And that's why I talked about instituting technology in firearms, where if I buy a weapon and it's stolen, it shouldn't even work without my biometrics, or it shouldn't fire without my biometrics, fingerprint, or maybe eye retina scan.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bender, sir.
Absolutely, I support constitutional carry. The state of Georgia has constitutional carry, and if you go to Georgia, you don't see people walking around with guns out in the open, right? From my research, the reason that constitutional carry isn't permitted is because of a court decision where it's like we don't want blacks walking around with guns out in the open. So it's not, for example, I know there's a lot of issue with the stand your ground law. That law can be used by any person of any color. Is to help protect yourself. I don't see an issue with constitutional carry. It's your right, and there should be less limitations.
One more follow-up, Mr. Bender, 30 seconds again. Your thoughts on a ban on what are described as assault weapons?
Absolutely not. Right? I think that we're good where we are. An assault rifle is a semi-automatic weapon. It's not a military-style weapon that goes automatically. I don't think that the average civilian should have automatic weapons nor grenades. But we can't keep fear-mongering by the appearance of a weapon. Yes, a rifle has a higher capacity, but pistols are used in the military as well. I don't think that the fear-mongering is a good thing. And I don't support fully automatic weapons, but it's a semi-automatic weapon.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Franklin?
In reference to that, I truly believe that and feel that good people have the right to have guns. And so when we look at bans, yes, we should ban them, but in a way that we approach it in a space that is more so about having more intense background checks, more psychological testing, and also starting to require the manufacturers to have biometrics with the guns. So for example, someone that is mentally stable, healthy, and a great place should have the right to own whatever weapon they want to own outside of obviously full automatic weapons, but something like an assault rifle. But it's important that we ensure that those weapons don't get into the hands of bad folks.
Okay, it's time for our lightning round. Please keep your response to yes, no, or a single sentence. We'll start with you, Mr. Bender. Who is your single most prized endorsement?
This is a tricky question. My family.
Mr. Franklin?
Yeah, I'd say my mom and my wife, yeah.
Mr. Bender, if you could immediately gain enough votes for passage, what's one law you would enact immediately?
Can you repeat that, please?
If you could immediately gain enough votes for passage, what's one law you would enact?
Define the term public when it comes to renewable energy to mean a mass amount of folks and not just one individual.
And what's one law you would invalidate?
Probably the new lottery law, because I want to know who the winner is.
Mr. Franklin, same two questions. Which law would you enact immediately?
I would want to expand Medicaid.
And what's one law you would invalidate?
There's a new law that talks about public, if you're kind of marching along and just trying to peacefully protest, you could potentially get arrested and charged with a crime if there's other people in that area that might be looting.
One sentence.
Got it.
Okay, next question, Mr. Franklin. What do you think Florida's legislative action should be in response to the U.S. Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade?
We need to not continue to try to go towards a full ban of abortion.
Mr. Bender.
Can you repeat that, please?
What do you think Florida's legislative action should be in response to the U.S. Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade?
Incorporate.
Incorporate?
Yeah, you said one word. Incorporate.
A ban or abortion rights?
Repeat the question.
What do you think Florida's legislative action should be in response to the U.S. Supreme Court's reversal of Roe v. Wade?
So the United States Supreme Court came to a decision, and I think we should incorporate the decision.
Okay. In addition to the U.S. Supreme Court overturning Roe v. Wade, Justice Clarence Thomas has stated his willingness to revisit precedents that protect contraception and same-sex marriage. Do you support a right to receive an abortion? Mr. Bender.
In limited circumstances, yes, particularly when it comes down to the health or the choice between the mother and the child.
Mr. Franklin.
I support abortion through the first trimester, so yes, you should have the right.
Mr. Franklin, do you support a right to a same-sex marriage?
Yes, I support the rights to same-sex marriage.
Mr. Bender.
No.
Mr. Bender, do you support a right to access contraception?
Yes.
Mr. Franklin.
Yes, I support the right to access contraception.
Mr. Franklin, do you have confidence that the vote count in the 2020 presidential election was correct?
I have full confidence that the 2020 election results were correct.
Mr. Bender.
Yes.
Mr. Bender, if you were elected, what do you want your legacy to be?
I don't really care much about my legacy. I just want to do good.
Mr. Franklin.
Helping people.
Thank you.
Okay, next up is our housing segment. What new ideas or proposals do you have to address the shortage of affordable housing? Mr. Bender.
I think with this new build for rent industry where folks are building hundreds of homes at a time, it's going to be indefinitely for rent. When I think of housing affordability, I think of affordable home ownership. I think that we should, for example, we could do two birds with one stone. If you're doing a build for rent and you're building these communities in large, I think that you should incorporate some sort of renewable energy infrastructure inside of that build for rent, where that big money is going. So, for example, if you're building communities in Mass that's going to be built for rent, you have to incorporate solar panels and other infrastructure, such as we did in, or not we, but the community of Babcock did down there in South Florida.
Okay, and Mr. Franklin?
The supply side of housing is low and the demand side is high, so trying to balance that, incentivizing builders to be able to build and ensure that we have more capacity for people to buy homes. That's why they're so expensive. So investing in infrastructure as well, because there's concurrency fees, there's when you're having to build out communities, there's sewage costs, there's electrical costs that government can play a role in ensuring that the cost to build homes and the speed to building can be faster, but also ensuring that those savings are passed on to the consumer. So it's not just, hey, enjoy this free bacon and still charge consumers, but also ensure that savings passed on. We can look at also taxes, our land taxes. How do we have our taxes in a place and space where when you're paying your mortgage, it's not so expensive every single year. So we keep increasing them typically by 3%. But looking at flatlining those during times like this.
All right, and I have a follow-up and 45 seconds for the follow-up, and Mr. Franklin will stay with you. Here's why the Florida property insurance market is said to be in crisis. While homeowners pay 3 times the U.S. average for coverage, more than a dozen companies have stopped writing new policies, and several others have closed shop this year. This is before Ian struck. How do you propose to fix this?
There's a few ways to fix this. One is ensuring that we do have a fund that's in place that helps support when things like Hurricane Ian happen. The private companies aren't completely on the hook. So using federal dollars from FEMA, using state dollars as well to support the recovery so that private companies know, okay, when catastrophic events like hurricanes happen, there is some support around to ensure that there's help. In addition to that, we have to look at litigation. As you know, there has been a recent scam out there that has to do with replacing roofs. I do believe if a real storm messed up someone's roof, insurance companies should cover that. But I have 2 homes in Jacksonville. Got a phone call from an attorney. No offense. And the attorney talked about, hey, I can get you a new roof. Well, my roof was 19 years old. I had missing shingles because it was an old roof, not because of something that happened. So addressing those type of scams to ensure that insurance companies are, well, I'll stop there with the yeah, thank you.
Okay. All right. Mr. Bender.
Can you repeat the question? I was laughing too much at
Sure.
Mr. Franklin's joke.
So in Florida is said to be in crisis, and homeowners are paying 3 times the U.S. average for coverage. More than a dozen companies have stopped writing new policies, and several others have closed shop this year. This is before Ian struck. How would you propose to fix this problem?
Thank you. That's a great question. And we're still working through the solutions of that in the legislature. So we just enacted the Emergency Relief Fund this year in 2022. But 90% of litigation in Florida is directed towards insurance companies. Certainly that we have to, we can't hire the barrier of entry to sue bad faith actors, but we have to figure out a way to reform first party claims. That's one of them. Another thing is we have to harden our infrastructure. I mentioned again the example of Babcock. Dr. Mark McNeese wrote a great op-ed in the Tallahassee Democrat. Once we continue to move forward, strengthen renewable energy, update our infrastructure or harden our infrastructure, then the effect will be less and the cost to recover will be less as well.
Thank you.
Well, gentlemen, we are now on the downhill slide of our encounter here today with less than half hour to go in our candidate forum. And, you know, we've been asking all the questions, and boy, I can tell exhaustion is starting to set in here. So what I'd like you to do is to ask your opponent a question that you would like an answer for. And if we could start with you, Mr. Bender, ask whatever you'd like of Mr. Franklin. He's got 45 seconds to respond.
What do you most admire about me and my campaign?
Yeah, great question. I think Mr. Bender's running for all the right reasons. He's talking about service, wanting to really push forward renewable energy, and I admire, you know, anyone that steps to the plate to serve their community, and he's done it in a very innovative way, and so I admire that about you.
Terrific. Mr. Franklin, what would you like to ask Mr. Bender to respond to?
That's a good question. Something that I don't already know. What's your biggest motivation in life?
Where I'm from, there's no roads. There's a river. There's no electricity. Still in my home house. There's no indoor plumbing. You have to cover the hole and move the outhouse. So I feel that there's so much opportunity in America. I feel that I've already won the game of life. I have a beautiful family. I just feel confident that I'm doing whatever I want to do. And every day I try to go out there and walk in water. So my motivation is just to leverage. I like to say I'm a student, entrepreneur, public servant. I'm a student of life that creates adventures to pay forward the talents I was gifted. So it's just going out there and doing good. And I think that that I'm just an average person. And I see a lot of the same qualities in you as well, Mr. Franklin.
Oh, thanks. Thank you.
James.
Now that I caught my breath, that was quite an interesting exchange, I must say. That was very interesting. Florida's, Mr. Franklin, starting with you. Florida's congressional redistricting map is under court challenge. Governor Ron DeSantis, in an unprecedented move, inserted himself into the process and produced what critics call a racial gerrymandered map that reduced in half the number of minority-majority districts, including one that included Tallahassee's Midtown, West, and South sides. Mr. Franklin, do you support the court challenge, and would you support legislation to prevent a governor from injecting themselves into the redistricting process as Governor Ron DeSantis has? And you have 60 seconds.
I do support our court challenge. I think it's so important that people of color have the opportunity to elect someone that can represent their values and ideologies. And so that 5th congressional district you're speaking of that Congressman Lawson currently sits in, I think should be retained or definitely taken a look at. And I would support legislation to try to take that type of power out of a governor, and not because it was done by a Republican governor. One day it could be done by a Democrat. I believe that's important to ensure we're serving people. And so to do that, we have to have fair districts, and I would prefer to see a third-party, non-political, non-partisan group to ensure that our representation representing our people truly reflect the makeup and the genetics and how our people look in the state.
Mr. Bender?
I echo Mr. Franklin or Dr. Franklin's statements. I don't think it's correct. I know that Congressman Dunn and Congressman Lawson, they had a great relationship, but now they're competing against each other. I don't think that's correct. I would support the court challenge. And I think it's important to say I'm not the average Republican. I have my own ideologies. I have my own thoughts. And I won't vote lockstep. Originally, the legislature rejected the governor's plan to insert himself in that redistricting, but then the governor reasserted, and the legislature, in my opinion, I'll use the word caved, and that wouldn't be me.
All right, folks, we have So I don't want to call it a follow-up, but it kind of has some linkage to the last line of questions that we had. The Florida legislature has preempted local authorities on a number of issues, including such things as worker benefits, gun control, environmental regulations, a host of these. Where on the preemption spectrum between home rule and state mandates do you stand? 30 seconds to respond. And Mr. Franklin, let's start with you.
I support home rule. The reason why I support home rule, which means that local municipalities, local elected officials are able to make decisions based on their local constituencies. They get elected, hired, and fired by the people that they serve. And so we have to make sure we restore a level of confidence that people know when they run for.
And I heard from Dr. Franklin before, in rare instances, you'll consider, for example, the implementation of a nuclear plant at a local level. The Constitution says that all the power is not delineated to the federal government, is reserved to the state. I think the state is the home rule, but of course the power rests closest to the people, which is in our local jurisdiction. However, it's good to have certain preemption, because if there's a local neighborhood around like Okeechobee that has large sugar canes, and if they want to allow pollution, I think that the state should be able to preempt it at that level. So there's always a give and a play.
Okay, thank you very much, gentlemen.
Okay, so Florida is one of 12 states that has not expanded Medicaid eligibility as allowed under the Affordable Care Act. Discuss why you do or do not support expanding Medicaid eligibility in Florida. Mr. Bender.
Yeah, I'll state that 2.7 million Floridians this year registered for the ACA, and I think that's a good thing. There's certain benefits from that. I always say that I think that Mitt Romney was unfairly demonized when he was running for office for being the precursor of Obamacare. But I think that under the principles of federalism, it's okay for the state to experiment on different things, and that's how we come to solutions. So I think that we should expand Medicaid because it ends up costing us more in the long run. It's a simple cost-benefit analysis.
I support expanding Medicaid. As we know, if you have insurance or you don't have insurance and you get sick enough, you're going to be able to receive health care anyway. You're going to show up at the hospital when it's almost too late. And guess what? It's more expensive to treat a patient who's at the ER fighting for their life than to treat them along the way with preventative services. And expanding Medicaid and ensuring that people are having access and going and getting preventative services would drive down our healthcare costs holistically. We're already subsidizing hospitals, critical access areas, and clinics for those having to address healthcare concerns of those who aren't having insurance.
Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Franklin, we'll stay with you. What's one important issue to the district that we haven't already discussed? 30 seconds.
We haven't discussed supporting state employees. This district has so many state employees as being the capital. It's so important that we are ensuring they're getting paid fairly. I want to look at how can we make sure there are automatic merit-based increases in salaries, not where the legislature has a vote on it every 5 years, but every single year based off of performance being able to have merit increases. Because that's the only way that we can retain talent as well as recruit people to work for the state. I talk to companies and businesses across the entire state of Florida, and they don't really have a lot of great things to say because we're so short-staffed because we can't hold on to good talent. Thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Bender?
The absurd utility prices in Gaston County that folks can't afford, that working professionals can't afford. And I also echo what Mr. Franklin said. One of the downsides of the budget cuts and being so fiscally responsible is that you have full-time career service employees. I know I was an attorney when I graduated law school. I was making sub $40,000. I was making about $36,000 a year, which is sustainable. So I left to go to the private sector, but I wanted to contribute my talents to the state. And it's a shame when families have to decide when they go home between getting another job or caring for their children.
Thank you.
Okay, let's see. We have additional questions since we have additional time, which is a good thing here. Tell you what, why don't I take state worker and then we'll kind of work our way through the last question.
Sure.
Since we have a lot of state workers, you know, present company included here for sure. So we'll start with this one here, and 30 seconds for response, and we also have a follow-up here. Should the Florida legislature reform FRS, the Florida retirement system, and do away with the defined benefit plan and require state workers to move their pension savings into a 401k style plan? How about you, Mr. Franklin?
We have to support employees, and the way we do that has to be completely through compensation or the compensation package. So we're not going to pay people top of the line competitive market rate for what their job will be in the private sector. Then we have to look at stuff like that, the fringe benefits where they know there's a pension. They don't have to invest in that pension. As you know, back in 2010, Governor Scott then required there to be an investment into your retirement program. As you know now, as you mentioned, they're trying to make sure people don't go towards the pension, but more so towards the 401k. And so we need to take a look at that and ensure that we're supporting state employees where they know that their future is secure once they retire.
Okay, Mr. Bender.
I apologize. Can you repeat that question, please?
Sure. The push that has been ongoing for quite a while by the Florida legislature to migrate more state employees from FRS, the Florida Retirement System, the defined benefit plan, into a 401k style plan. What are your thoughts on that? Support it or oppose it? What do you think?
When I was a state employee, I had two options. There's one sort of the investment-driven plan, and the other one sort of a pension-based plan, and I chose the investment-driven. I don't exactly understand what your question is asking. But one thing I will say, what I think will make a lot of folks more happy, is recently Governor DeSantis he instructed that ESG, environmental social governance, can't be a consideration for state pension plans when they're deciding who to invest in. And I think the vast majority of Floridians support good environmental policy, and that should be allowed.
Okay, and a 30-second follow-up, starting with you, Mr. Bender. Should state workers receive annual cost of living adjustments to keep pace with inflation?
I'll start with saying first, I think we need to have a competitive market rate. Of course, the private sector will always have a higher salary for employees. For example, I know, many top attorneys, general counsels, they're about 120 to 135. In a private sector, they can make 250, 800. I don't think that we can match that, but I think it has to be at least an affordable, fair wage so that folks can go home and they could care for their children and not have to get a second job. Like I had to Uber on the side. Just my thoughts.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Franklin.
Yes, I do support the cost of living wage increases. And the way that we typically do it in the private sector is also based off of merit. And so as long as you meet the expectations, does not need improvements, you are eligible to receive that. And so that way we know that we're retaining the talent that's really working hard for the state. And so I completely support an automatic increase based off of you're meeting expectations at the job to ensure that we can keep with inflation, where now, as you know, we vote on it every, 4 or 5 years.
Very good.
Mr. Franklin, let's stay with you. What does protecting democracy mean?
Protecting democracy to me means expanding access to being able to vote. So, for example, I truly believe if you have a social security number and you are identified by the federal government, you are a U.S. citizen, you should have the right to vote. I think even registering to vote to me is another obstacle people put in place. Obviously, it's not the same as poll taxes back in the day, but it's still a step in a direction of there's this piece of paper you have to fill out, but why can't I show up with my social security card, right? And then I'm a citizen, I go and cast a ballot to vote. So to me, protecting democracy is ensuring that everyone's involved and engaged. Abraham Lincoln said the best of the people, by the people, and for the people. But for that to work, we all have to be involved in the process.
Mr. Bender, the same question.
Okay, so I'm a Frederick Douglass Republican and Abraham Lincoln Republican. And also, so James Madison in Federalist Papers number 39, he said that, it's the Declaration of Independence, the second paragraph is, elect leaders from the governed. I think if you're governed, you should have the right to vote. I do agree with the interpretation of the Amendment 4, but I think that's just legality. That's what it says. I agree with that. But I think it shouldn't be an option. If you're subject to government, you should have participation in that government in any and all instances. And I also believe, for example, I think in the recent bill, the voting right bill, I think it expanded a lot of rights for voting. I disagree that if you're a citizen that you should automatically be registered, but we did things to now make it to where the DMV, if you change your address, they must communicate with the Division of Elections, because we have to figure out, folks have to register within their specific precinct so that we don't have folks from all over voting for different local elections. But I think that the systems we have in place are good. We have to find ways to continue to harden them. And I think we're doing that. And I think we have to continue having honest feedback and not fairmongering and mischaracterizing the laws that we could pointedly address. And I mentioned it before. It's an issue is that, okay, if you need a voter ID, I think that's a good way to say, prove who you are. You could disagree. But if the argument is that people can't afford it, all right, let's address that like we did. So I think we just make incremental steps forward, step by step, with honest dialogue.
Okay. Do we have time for a follow-up?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, Mr. Bender, I'd like to have a follow-up, and of course, Mr. Franklin, you'll have an opportunity too. Mr. Bender, you said if you are governed, you should have the right to vote. So do you believe there's no revocation of a person's voting right, that there should be no revocation of someone's voting right?
Absolutely. If you are governed, you should have a right to participate because you still have to pay taxes. That's why this country started, taxation without representation. So as long as you're subject to governance, you should have a right to participate, and that's irrevocable. That's just my stance on that, absolutely.
Mr. Franklin.
No, I would agree with that. And that's why I support restoring the rights of felons. Once you serve your time and you did your time from particular felonies, of course, I know we have the exceptions of like rape and murder, but other type of felonies, you should be able to participate in society once you're back out of jail. And so I do believe that people deserve the right to vote, as long as they're, law-abiding citizens who aren't a part of some gang or, obviously, like the Italian mafia. That's a different scenario. But people that are living every day and doing the right thing and want to help the country out. And so I support full-fledged everyone have the right to vote.
All right, sticking with you, please, Mr. Franklin, for another question here. Since we haven't really delved into education that much here, let's give some additional time here. 45-second response for this one. What's your opinion of charter schools and public funded vouchers for private and religious schools?
That's a really great question. As you know, since the mid-90s is when charter schools began. And before that, traditional education hadn't had many changes. I support school choice in a space where you can go to a magnet school if you're interested in healthcare. A charter school down the street could be better suited for the student. I think we have to ensure that we're supporting students, being focused on student success, because that's ultimately how we're going to ensure that students can be the best version of themselves. In reference to vouchers, I don't support the universal voucher initiative they're talking about now in the legislature, but I do support it in a space for those who can't afford to go to schools. So, for example, I consider that equity in education. So a friend of mine whose parents can afford to send their child somewhere else, well, since they can afford it, it's okay. But a friend of mine who obviously doesn't have the same financial means, I do believe if you're below the poverty line, you should have the same access to quality education as the person next to you, regardless of what your zip code might be.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Bender.
Yeah, I support the school voucher program, and that's one of the reasons that Governor DeSantis edged over former Mayor Andrew Gillum, because I heard Corey Simon talk about it, what the struggles his mother had to use her work address so he could get into a better school. And I think that we know that property taxes are higher in more affluent places, and that helps to contribute to a better school system. I don't think that children should be penalized. The focus of the education system are the children, and next to the children are the parents. The education system, the schools, they're essentially public servants, and only about 68% of the money goes with the student. So I think that the right belongs to the student and their parents, not necessarily the education system.
Very good. James.
All right, Mr. Franklin, this is for you, 60 seconds. It's about homelessness. It's becoming much more visible in the Tallahassee area. How do we solve this problem? Or is it a problem that government is responsible for? And if so, how do we solve it?
Government should be engaged in the process, absolutely, to make sure we're supporting the right mental health clinics to service, our people who are having challenges at the time. And so mental health is actually the center focal point for homelessness. Oftentimes, if someone dies in the family, there's some catastrophic event, you no longer have that desire to work and live. And so making sure that we get them access to mental health services is the first thing, but also ensuring they have training programs as well. There should be requirements to participate in homeless type of activities, whether it's shelter or food, which is, hey, we have this trade program. And we also have these mental health services. So to be a part of this, you've got to participate in these things as well, so we can help you become the best version of yourself. And that's the only way I can see us really addressing it. Outside of that, it's great to offer homeless services, and I support that wholeheartedly. But if we don't also just give and also have an expectation to what the future looks like for folks, oftentimes we'll just have more and more people that are coming from other places because obviously where we have great services, those follow. So mental health services, also training programs to ensure they can get back on their feet to be the best version of themselves.
Mr. Bender?
Was the question?
Okay, homelessness is becoming much more visible in our district, in our area. And the question is this a problem that government should address? And if so, how do we address homelessness?
Certainly, I think this is a problem that government shouldn't continue to exasperate. Let's look at City Walk recently. It's like everyone wants to help, but not in their backyard. I say, tell me where's a bad place to help someone, and I don't want to be there. So the city of Tallahassee lost a lawsuit in the administrative court, and then they appealed it, and they appealed it. They're spending all this money to fight folks, City Walk, Renee and Tony Miller, great people that are just trying to do their best to help the services, and we have government literally getting in the way and coming up with excuses. I mean, it's ridiculous. I think certainly government, this is when I say we have to leverage our economies of scale as a government to assist. But for sure, get out the way and stop penalizing people trying to do good.
Okay, folks, just by request, one final question here before we head into the wrap up here. What are your thoughts on the recently established Florida Office of Election Crimes and Security? 30 seconds, Mr. Bender, you first.
Yeah, I don't think it's a good thing. I think that I think that many decisions that come out of the governor's office is things that I don't agree with. The majority of them I do. This particular one I don't agree on. I think that we have great elections here in Florida. We have safe elections here in Florida, and I think we have effective elections here in Florida. But I just don't agree with that whole scheme.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Franklin, for you.
Yeah, even though I support safe and fair elections, of course, but this task force obviously is not in the best interest of the state. And this was 2000, back when we had Chads, remember those butterfly ballots, remember those? And there really was an election that had some challenges to them. Then yeah, I think at that moment in time, this would make perfect sense. But in 2020, 2022, we have great elections. We've had a lot of fair elections here in this country. I think it's a waste of tax dollars. I do support fair and safe elections, of course, but this is just unnecessary, in my opinion.
Gentlemen, you have reached the final threshold. Congratulations of getting it through our candidate forum. We want to give you an opportunity to wrap up your candidacy, kind of put a little package and with a bow on it if you'd like, and you can include such things as website or whatever else here. 90 seconds for each one of you. And Mr. Bender, your closing comments, sir.
Great. So I think that both candidates up here are excellent persons. They do very good in their community. I'll differentiate myself a bit. I think the primary challenge facing District 8 is economic development. I'm an entrepreneur that attended law school. For example, I volunteered at TCC Spark program for 15 months every single month. Out of that came the first black title oak company in Florida, many other entrepreneurs. I served as a chair at Tallahassee Startup Week twice. I brought money into our district to fund the first pitch competition, and the winner ended up going and pitching successfully in Shark Tank. If you go to my website, bendercampaign.com, you'll see some more initiatives. But I'd like to share a quick story on how I think we could protect democracy. Back in 2008, when whether marriage is between a man and a woman, that was on the ballot. I didn't have a car, and my roommate at the time was gay, and I had no idea. And we got in a very spirited argument, and I used some very profane things that I've never used again. And he's like, "Kurt, I'm gay." And I realized when a mutual friend started clapping because he finally came out to me. And that gentleman drove me to the ballot box knowing that my vote would cancel his vote. And it's just that we had a different of opinion, but we respected each other and we loved each other. And that's still my brother to this day. So I think that we can disagree on important issues, but we can still love the person and just know that, hey, we're going to have some differences. And I think that's how we protect democracy and we don't attack. I commend Dr. Franklin. I think this has been a very positive race. And that's how we protect democracy, by letting people know that it's okay for you to come up here and try and that you're not going to be attacked in every single thing that you do.
Thank you very much, sir. And Mr. Franklin, you have the last word.
Yeah. District 8 has some of the highest poverty levels in comparison to other places in the state of Florida. We're having challenges just putting food on the table, filling up our gas tanks. And so it's so important that we're focused on economic development. Also, healthcare in this district has been a challenge. You know, there's parts of this region where you have to drive 20 and 30 minutes just to get your blood work done. So we want to make sure we're investing in ensuring that we have access and quality healthcare. We're also focused on investing in education, supporting public schools and public school teachers and all teachers as well as supporting state employees. This seat also represents Florida A&M University at the Capitol. And as a former member of the Family Board of Trustees and a former member of the Florida Board of Governors, it's ensure that we have someone in the seat that can protect the legacy and tradition of FAMU. I'm asking for you to go to the ballot and vote on November 8th. Please vote for me, Gallup Franklin. Our website is gallupfranklin.org, gallupfranklin.org. Send us an email if you'd like to have more conversations with us at engage@gallupfranklin.org. Thank you so much for your time. Looking forward to meeting more people out on the campaign trail.
Thanks to the candidates, the Tallahassee Democrat, the League of Women Voters of Tallahassee, WFSU Public Media, and all of our viewers for joining us for this program.
You can find a replay of this forum and all the others in our series on YouTube pages, plus Tallahassee.com and WFSU.org. The recorded broadcast will be Wednesday, October the 19th at 11 a.m. on WFSU 88.9 FM.
WFSU and the Tallahassee Democrat will be hosting the next live forum for the U.S. House of Representatives race, and that will take place today, Tuesday, October 18th at 3 p.m. That race between Al Lawson and Neil Dunn. Al Lawson has confirmed attendance. Neil Dunn has declined, saying he was not available to attend, and this will be treated as an empty seat forum.
And if you have any questions for any of our upcoming forums, please email us at news@tallahassee.com. And you can look for these forums plus interviews with the candidates on our website at the Tallahassee Democrat website, tallahassee.com. Plus, keep an eye out for our special general election insert, which will be in our print version on Sunday, October 23rd. Have a great day.